My brother trashed my entire bedroom because I refused to buy him a video game, and my parents told me to apologize for being insensitive to his mental health. So I called the police and had him arrested. My brother Nolan destroyed my bedroom in March because I wouldn't buy him a $70 game for his console. He was 22 years old and unemployed, but still expected me to fund his gaming hobby since I had a job. He walked into my room while I was working and announced he needed the new racing game that just came out. I told him to buy it himself, and he said he didn't have money because job hunting was stressful, and games helped him relax. I said that wasn't my problem, and he should probably focus on finding work instead of playing games all day. He got angry and said I made good money as a nurse, so $70 was nothing to me. He said I was being selfish by not sharing with family when he'd do the same for me if situations were reversed. I reminded him that when I was unemployed 2 years ago, he wouldn't even lend me $20 for groceries. He said that was different because I found a job eventually while he was still struggling. He wasn't struggling. He just wasn't trying because our parents paid his bills, and he lived rent-free at home. I went back to work on my laptop and told Nolan to leave my room. He stood there for 5 minutes saying I'd regret being stingy and that he deserved the game for all the stress he was under. I put on headphones and ignored him until he finally left. An hour later, I heard crashing sounds from upstairs but assumed Nolan was just having another tantrum in his room. When I went up to my bedroom that evening, I found complete destruction. Nolan had torn apart everything he could reach. My mattress was flipped and cut open with scissors, stuffing everywhere. My laptop screen was shattered and the keyboard was ripped off. My work clothes were cut into pieces and thrown around. My nursing textbooks were ripped apart with pages scattered. My jewelry box was smashed and earrings scattered. My makeup was opened and smeared on the walls. My television was face down on the floor, screen cracked. He'd even broken my grandmother's antique mirror that hung above my dresser. Nolan was sitting on his bed playing an old game when I confronted him. He said maybe next time I'd remember that sharing is important. He said it was just stuff, and I could replace it with all the money I was hoarding. He actually smiled and said he felt better getting his frustration out and suggested I try it sometime instead of being so uptight about money. I called our parents who were at dinner and told them to come home immediately. When they arrived, my mother gasped at the destruction, but my father said boys will be boys, and Nolan was obviously stressed about his situation. My mother started cleaning up while making excuses that Nolan just didn't know how to express his emotions properly. They offered to pay for some of the damages but said I should have just bought the game to avoid this situation. They actually suggested I apologize for being insensitive to Nolan's mental health struggles. That's when I decided Nolan needed to face real consequences for once in his life. I started by calling the police to file a destruction of property report. The officer who came estimated over $5,000 in damages between my electronics, clothing, and furniture. Since Nolan was an adult who destroyed another adult's property, this was criminal vandalism. My parents begged me not to press charges, but I insisted on filing the report. Nolan was arrested that night and spent the weekend in jail because courts were closed until Monday. Next, I contacted my insurance company about the damages. They required a police report, which I had, and they said they'd cover everything but would go after Nolan for reimbursement. Since Nolan had no money or assets, they'd garnish any future wages he earned. This would follow him for years until the debt was paid. I also started packing everything valuable from my room into boxes and moved them to a storage unit. I installed a lock on my door that only I had the key to. I told my parents that until Nolan moved out, my room was off limits to everyone. They said I was overreacting, but I reminded them their son had caused thousands in damages over a video game. On Monday, Nolan had to appear before a judge who was not impressed by a grown man destroying property over being denied a toy. The judge ordered him to pay full restitution and sentenced him to 60 hours of community service. Nolan tried to explain that I could afford the damages, but the judge said that was irrelevant to the crime. The judge also ordered Nolan to attend anger management classes at his own expense. The story spread through our extended family when Nolan was late for our cousin's wedding. When he entered the hall, everyone was looking at him. My cousin walked up to me at the cocktail reception area, while everyone else grabbed drinks and appetizers from the buffet tables. He asked why Nolan showed up so late and looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. I took a breath and said Nolan had a court appearance this morning for destroying my property. The conversation around us stopped like someone hit a pause button. My uncle turned from the bar with his glass halfway to his mouth. My other cousin stopped mid-bite of a chicken skewer. Even the bartender looked over at me with wide eyes. My cousin asked what I meant by destroying my property, and I explained that Nolan trashed my entire bedroom over a video game and caused over $5,000 in damages. Someone's fork clattered onto their plate. My aunt set down her wine glass so hard I thought it might crack. Everyone just stared at me with their mouths open like I'd announced I was joining a cult or something. My aunt grabbed my elbow and pulled me toward the hallway near the bathrooms. She kept her voice low, but I could hear the anger in every word. She said I had no right to air family business at a wedding reception. She said I embarrassed Nolan on Maverick's special day and made everyone uncomfortable. I tried to explain that people asked me a direct question and I answered honestly, but she cut me off. She said there's a time and place for honesty, and this wasn't it. She said I should have kept this private and handled everything within the family, instead of getting police and courts involved like we were strangers. She said families work things out together without bringing in outsiders who don't understand the situation. I asked her how exactly the family planned to work out $5,000 in damages, and she just shook her head. She said I was being dramatic and vengeful instead of forgiving like family should be. She walked back to the reception before I could respond. Charlotte found me a few minutes later standing alone near the coat check. She looked around to make sure no one was listening and then thanked me for what I did. I must have looked confused because she explained that Nolan always creeped her out with his entitled attitude. She said at a family barbecue last summer, Nolan demanded she buy him dinner because she had money from her job. He actually got angry when she refused and spent the rest of the evening making comments about how selfish she was. She said she'd been dating Maverick for 3 years, and Nolan made every family gathering uncomfortable with his demands and tantrums. She said someone needed to finally hold him accountable, and she was glad I did it even though the rest of the family was mad. She squeezed my hand and went back to find Maverick. At least one person understood why I couldn't just let it go. The car ride home felt like being trapped in a freezer. My parents didn't say a single word for the entire 20-minute drive. Dad's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. Mom stared out the passenger window with her arms crossed. I sat in the back seat watching streetlights pass by and knowing what was coming. We pulled into the driveway and I barely got through the front door before they both started in on me. Dad said everyone at that wedding thinks I'm cruel and heartless. Mom said I humiliated the entire family by announcing Nolan's legal troubles in front of everyone. They took turns talking at me for 2 solid hours. Dad said I could have just told people Nolan was running late or had an appointment. He said there was no reason to give details about court appearances and property destruction. Mom cried about how I ruined family relationships forever by being so harsh with my own brother. She said cousins and aunts and uncles would never look at me the same way again. She said I chose punishment over family unity, and now everyone would remember this wedding as the day I destroyed our family's reputation. I tried to explain that I didn't bring it up, that people asked me directly what happened, but they didn't want to hear it. Dad said I should have lied or changed the subject or done anything besides telling the truth. The argument went in circles until almost midnight when I finally went to my locked bedroom and left them still talking in the living room. Nolan started his anger management classes the following week. He complained about them constantly every single day. He told Mom the counselor was stupid and didn't understand his situation at all. He said the counselor kept saying he needed to take responsibility for his actions. Nolan thought this was completely unfair because I provoked him by being selfish with my money. He said the counselor didn't get that some people push you until you snap, and then act surprised when you react. Mom made sympathetic noises and offered to talk to the counselor about how stressful job hunting was for Nolan. I heard this conversation from the kitchen where I was making dinner after my shift at the hospital. Nolan said the other people in the class were actually violent and dangerous, while he just broke some stuff in a moment of frustration. He said it wasn't the same thing at all. He said the counselor treated everyone like criminals when some people just had normal reactions to unfair situations. I left the room before I said something I'd regret. A large envelope arrived in the mail 2 weeks later addressed to Nolan. Mom opened it because Nolan was still asleep at 2 in the afternoon. She read through the papers and her face went pale. She called Dad at work and I heard her voice getting higher and more panicked. The insurance company sent official letters about the garnishment plan since Nolan had no assets to seize. The papers explained that any job Nolan got would have his wages taken automatically until the $5,000 plus fees was paid back. Mom kept saying this would follow him for years and make it even harder for him to find work. She said how could any employer want to hire someone with wage garnishment? Dad came home early and they both sat at the kitchen table reading through all the paperwork. Mom looked at me like I'd personally ruined Nolan's entire future. She asked if I was happy now that Nolan would be paying for one mistake for years. I reminded her that destroying $5,000 worth of property wasn't just one mistake. It was a crime. Dad told me to go to my room. My hands shook while I prepared medications for my patients the next week. I'd been working at the hospital for 3 years and never made errors. But that Tuesday, I almost gave the wrong dosage to a patient in room 4. I caught it before administering, but my